In 2004, then Minister of Intelligence, Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, was reassigned to head up the Department of Human Settlements. In this, her second term, she called upon all stakeholders in the construction sector. Simply put, this policy called for the creation of integrated settlements where the rich and poor lived side by side close to the place of work and play. Today, we talk to Minister Sisulu about the successes, challenges, and future of this quest to build a South Africa for all who live in it. Welcome to Breaking New Ground, Minister. Thanks for giving us your time. We know you're busy. Your budget speech for this year was given on the birthday of a struggle stalwart, your dad. How did that feel?
No, actually it was quite by a coincidence that we got that date. And when I realized that it was an important date, I thought I'd give myself time to reflect on something that was bigger than what I would normally give. And I look at this budget speech and I'm quite happy with the comprehensive way in which we dealt with matters going forward. Actually took some time, about a day away from work, to make sure that it is just so befitting of the occasion.
One of the things you mentioned right at the beginning of the speech, which was amazing for Women's Month, is of course quoting Marie Curie,
yes,
a great scientist,
yeah.
And you took the quote where she says, you don't only look at what's done,
yeah.
In fact, when you get there, you look at what still has to be done. Could we maybe reflect on your term from 2002, which is the second, by the way, in this department, up to now?
The second one was almost like starting all over, and I got extremely frustrated with that. So we have decided within the department that we're going to make sure that everything is codified, everything is within legislation, because within our first term here, we were drafting policy. We had not quite got to the point of making sure that the policy becomes law. We had about 2 pieces of legislation at that time, but the bulk of what we now call human settlements remains policy as opposed to legislation. The difference between policy and legislation is that by the time it is legislated, it becomes law. It is done in relation to law. While it is policy, it may be changed by anybody who comes through. The policy is an indication of the direction in which you're going to drive the particular department. Most of our policy is crafted as we experience a problem and as we solve that problem. And on 2 occasions, we've drafted our policies in line with what the Constitutional Court or any other court that has heard our cases has defined. But now we are at the point where we would like to make sure that we have a human settlements legislation to ensure that even if I were to have a 3rd term in human settlements, or somebody else were to come in, or something else were to happen, there would be codified legislation that indicates what human settlements is about and what needs to be done.
Just to go a little bit through the challenges of this period, one of them, of course, as you pointed out in the speech, was the title deeds. Could we start by understanding what's important about them? Why are they important?
What we're giving our people in the form of subsidized housing is an asset. Now, we are probably the first generation of people, especially disadvantaged people, who will have permanent tenure and security of tenure over the land or the property that they own. And we want to make sure that asset can be turned into something that can be used for asset value purposes. Otherwise, it remains what is called dead assets.
Now I have the title deed, I own the house. Part of leveraging it could be to sell it. And we don't want this to happen, so how is the department covering that section?
Well, we have a preemptive clause within the legislation that indicates that this asset may not be sold for 8 years after you've received it, because we perceive that 8 years is enough time for anybody to have used that asset to maximum advantage. And out of that, if they feel that they no longer need the house, the requirement is that they must first sell it to the state or get permission from the state, so that we know for certain that that person to whom we gave this asset has now graduated and has used, leveraged the asset value to get themselves out of a particular situation, and we would then buy the house from them or allow them to sell the house.
One of the other key, I think, policy points when you took over again in 2004 was to make sure that military veterans are prioritized, that the elderly, 80 years and over, are prioritized. How has that gone up to now?
We need to jack up our IT systems, our database, and we have again indicated in the speech that we put together a task team to ensure that we have the necessary data available to us. Because if we don't have it as a register against which we check, then we have a situation where we have 80-year-olds dying in a shack, which is a terrible, terrible thing to happen to anybody in a democratic state. But in particular, we have wanted to emphasize our concern for military veterans. Now, military veterans are a group of people who are very special to any country, because these are people who give up their lives to say, for my country, I'll give up my life to save my country or to propel it forward. And these are people that are deserving of special treatment, are normally given special treatment in most countries. In our country, for a while, because we were adjusting to a new government and there was so much to do, they tended not to have been given priority. So we wanted to give them priority in making sure that they have decency around them, dignity, and a house couldn't be a better way of starting. It took us a long time to get the policies right, because we had to interact with the military veterans themselves. And they felt that what we were giving them was not what they thought, they deserved. And indeed they were right, but within the circumstances and the resources that we have, that was just some way of starting. We're now prioritizing military veterans and fast tracking, and there is a task team that has been set up to make sure that by the time the year ends, all military veterans will be accounted for.
We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we'll talk about what the achievements have been up to this point. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Now I would like to talk a little bit about what is possible when a responsive government deals with a responsible citizenry. Minister, what I found interesting in your speech is that you actually started with the problems of Ennerdale, Eldorado Park, and Joe Slovo in Gauteng as an opener to what has been happening. Yeah. Could you take us through what was going there and what the government response was?
Yes. You know, very often it is when people are out in the streets protesting that people gauge us, and they completely forget what we have covered. So I thought, okay, let me capture that which is in the public domain right now. That was Ennerdale, that was Eldorado Park, and Lenasia, and Kliptown, and etc. Because a few months before, we had roads blocked, tires burning on streets, and etc. We had immediately, on realizing that we had a situation on our hands, decided to go to the people to find out what the problem is. And we first sent our team. We have a rapid response team, and they came back with the result that, Minister, the people who are unhappy are largely backyarders. These are people who have grown up in a home, have got to the backyard of their home, and they've outgrown that backyard, because it is possibly 3 generations now since those houses were built. And we then arranged that we were going to meet the entire community. So we sat down with them. They were a very agitated group of people, and I'd taken a decision that I'm going to take to the meeting the MEC and the 2 mayors who are responsible, so that all of us understand the problem and all of us are able to take decisions based on what the people were expressing in that meeting, and explain to them the situation that we're in, that the rate at which we're urbanizing in this country is phenomena. It is just not possible for any government to cope. What we're doing is the best that we can. And in fact, we repeat the same message. We've now built 4.5 million houses. No other country, none, has ever done that or will ever do that foreseeably in the future. And that because of the huge backlog that we'd inherited from apartheid, it would take a long time for us to deal with the problem of giving every needy home a house, compounded with the fact that we also have in-migration from other countries. We also are growing, the urban population is growing. All of these make a heady mixture of a very problematic situation. That human settlements is not just a walk in the park, but also we wanted them to take ownership of the problem and how we solve the problem. So we came to the conclusion, all of us there, that look, they were saying themselves, which was good because this was their initiative, there is land near Ennerdale where we live. Why don't you give us some land and we'll be able to build ourselves? Now we have a program that urges people to do that, but when it comes from the community itself, it was very good. So we allowed them to lead us. So how are you going to do that? And they told us how they were going to do that. Will we have commitment that it will not be shacks? So when you're given material, you'll build. We'll do all of that. We'll do all of that. So it was good. Very heated meeting, but with very good outcomes because there was a commitment on both our sides about what we're going to do. And we committed that the very next day we would start the enumeration so that we actually put them on our database. The enumeration has now been done. It is completed. The land has been identified. It is being subdivided as we speak. The services are being put in there. And we've had a follow-up meeting with the 3 spheres of government to get a report from our officials about what is happening. And very soon we will be publishing the results of our survey on who is on the database so that they're able to confirm. And I'm hoping that by November people will start building there and we will have, at least for the first part, lived up to our commitment.
And it is a blueprint for how you deal with a problem like this elsewhere in the country.
It is a blueprint in the sense that when you respond speedily to a problem, it is so much easier to solve. Otherwise, if it is left unattended, it simmers into something that is far greater than we are able to deal with. But in terms of the solution has been there. And we call it the PHP program, which is the People's Housing Program, where we offer people land and we support them in building their own houses. But it hasn't been as popular as we thought it would be, because it requires a great deal of effort from the person who's dealing with it. And if you can get a free house, why would you want to put effort in this? But when the people of Ennerdale decided that this is the way we want to go, we thought, well, let's popularize it. Because in effect, when they do it themselves, the outcome is so much better. They can change the shape, they can do the different design. We will be able to supply the material. And out of that, they will get the necessary skills, which could allow them to go and be part of a contracting company or something. And for us, the value is that not only are they participating in taking themselves out of poverty, but we are quite certain that if they build their own houses, they're not likely to sell them, and they will look after them.
When we come back, we talk to the partnerships that the government has with the private sector to deliver more. Stay with us. We are talking to Minister Lindiwe Sisulu as we look at her second term in the Department of Human Settlements. One of the most important things you seem to want at the beginning of this term was to make sure that all the stakeholders within the construction industry come together with the ministry's vision. How has that been? How has the private sector come on board?
Well, in my first term, we had come together with the banks and the mining industry to sign a social contract together with several other federations that represent the urban poor. because we felt that the only way that we can get to the bottom of this problem is to work in partnership with people who are affected or can help. And the banks, I must say, came to the table and we did wonders. Most of the major projects that we have, like Conubia, like N2, like Cosmos City, the banks have been supporting that and have been funding that. We decided this time that we were going to go even further and make sure that the mining industry comes on board. They had signed the social contract, but they had not actively participated. But after Marikana, we decided that we needed to pay particular attention to the living conditions of people who are in mining towns. And under the presidency, there is a committee that is called Mining Towns and Upgrading of Mining Towns. So we meet on a regular basis to see what is our cooperation between ourselves and the mining industry. And we've got very good relationships with the mine owners, and they are in complete agreement that they have a responsibility towards the people who work in the mines. So there we are at one. We are carrying through our responsibilities, each one of us putting together what we are responsible for, and the outcome is very good. Fortuitously for us, I had on my advisory board the king of the Royal Bafokeng. And together we went through the initial stages of understanding what is human settlements. And he really was very passionate about that. He would go to Singapore, Malaysia to learn best practice. And by the time I caught up with him in my second term, he had far outstripped government thinking. And what he has produced now in Royal Bafokeng is a beautiful, beautiful little city. And I'd like to find a way in which it is replicated by every mining town or by every huge employer. Here what has been agreed on was that government through the MIG fund would provide the infrastructure, the bulk infrastructure, and Royal Bafokeng would provide the housing. The houses are just beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Now you are also looking at the Human Settlements Development Bank. That's an incredible, is it a replication of what the banks are doing, or what specifically is it going to be helping to do?
Well, one of the things we did in my first term was to go around and learn what other countries at the same level of development were doing around the issue of housing. And we went to Malaysia, and we learned a lot from Malaysia. And what we discovered from Malaysia is the centrality of a construction bank and how it can assist us get out of the kind of trap that we have. And what we found here were 3 different development finance entities. And one of them was put together to support entrepreneurs, especially black entrepreneurs, get the necessary funding to be able to get into the industry and build. The second one was set up to deal with rural areas and give out loans to rural areas. People in the rural areas have communal land, so they don't need to move to cities to get accommodation if they are able to be assisted to be where they are and improve their housing conditions. The other one was the normal housing bank that we had, NHFC. Now, what Treasury and ourselves got to understand is that if we consolidated them, we'll get better service out of them. Number one, we will be consolidating their resources, and out of their resources, they'll be able to leverage private sector support. It took us a long time, but we finally did establish the Human Settlements Development Bank. And I was so happy. I was so happy because it probably is the second bank that we have put up as government that specifically targets a particular sector of a society, largely disadvantaged and black, and wanting to get out of a poverty trap. And here is a way in which they can get themselves out of a trap. And we are hoping that the terms around which we make loans will be very different from the private sector. Banks are very risk averse. We are hoping that this one will be sensitive to the fact that we're dealing with the very poor and want to get them out of poverty.
This talks, in a sense, having this bank, it talks to the future of how the Department of Human Settlements will be working. But amongst the plans for the future, for me, what is exciting is alternative building technologies.
Yes, it's exciting for me too.
And yes, I know you mentioned that in the speech. So I'd like us to take us through that and what you expect to deliver using it.
You know, we set up an innovation hub in my first term. It is called Eric Mulobi because he was the first chairperson of the NHFC, which has now become a bank. We set up this innovation hub because we wanted to find alternative technologies, quicker ways of doing things, cheaper ways of doing things, or more indigenous ways of doing things. So we have a hub there. We invited people to come and put up innovative technologies, use innovative technologies to put up housing. And sadly, after a while, we discovered that there's no uptake amongst our people for this alternative technology because they believe in brick and mortar, and it is always brick and mortar. So I decided that, look, to give them an appetite for this, we've got to make sure that it is part and parcel of our proportionality. We've got to find a way in which, within what we build, we've got to find a way of putting alternative technology. So we're now wanting to ensure that for every mega project that we're building, there will be a certain amount of uptake for alternative technology. We've got to diversify. We've got to diversify because brick and mortar takes forever to build. Brick and mortar for me remains extremely expensive. However, I'm told by people who are married to brick and mortar that it actually is that alternative technology is not necessarily cheaper, but I do know that it is quicker.
Cosmos City is what you normally refer to as a catalytic project.
It is, indeed, it is. It is a success of Cosmos City and other places like that that have led us to understand that we can do it better. We can do it on scale, and we should do it on scale to be able to cover ground and to be able to make sense of the new approach that we have. So we put it up as a pilot project, and it has worked fantastically. So we've now decided that we're not going to do anything outside of catalytic project, which means mega projects with everything in it. And what is catalytic about it is that it generates the necessary employment. It creates a different environment around where perhaps everything else will be possible. It's an engine of growth. It provides all of those things that cities should do. And so we have now embarked on catalytic projects. We've just approved 48 catalytic projects for the provinces, and we're going into catalytic projects that are given to us by the private sector. And I'm told that we are in the region of 100 of them that have been submitted, and we'll possibly accept all of those 100 and more. So by the time we roll out our catalytic projects, we will have this construction site we've been talking about. South Africa will be turned into a construction site.
Please join us as we take you through what the department is doing, how you can benefit from the work, and most importantly, as a responsible citizen, how you can participate to improve the results. Until next time, goodbye.